Hi, and welcome to a brand new episode of Live from the Pool House. We are live from the Pool House. I am one of your hosts. My name is T.L. Foster, and unfortunately, Sonya could not be here today. She is off gallivanting with one Colt Cabana, she told me to say. I don't know if that's accurate. That's what she told me to say. But we are joined, or I am joined today, by one of my favorite people. I will allow him to introduce himself.
Hi, live from the pool hall. It's Dave Rutten.
And Dave, if people don't know, where you're from, because you used to podcast, correct?
Yeah, I still do from time to time.
Right.
This being proof. But yeah, I used to do a lot of the Laser Time shows. Still pop up on those from time to time. Did Cheap Podcast, the pro wrestling podcast. Nowadays, it's just kind of like if I'm interested in a specific topic, I'll nag Chris about it, and then he'll eventually say, "Okay, let's do it." But yeah, it's now I'm part-time podcasting. Full-time other stuff.
Right.
But I like when I heard you and Sonya were doing this podcast, I was like, oh, I used to watch, Fresh Prince all the time on, I believe, Channel 11 in New York. It was like post Saved by the Bell. I think it was like, it might have been in a block with like Family Matters and Full House. So like, it was like all that good stuff. And then there was the Hour of Simpsons, which is like nothing else can preempt that. But when this was put on the right time slot in syndication, I was all about it. And when I had the whole list of season 1 episodes to pick from, this one immediately jumped out at me.
Right. Well, and I think that's always really weird. So me and Sonya, we were talking about it, and we talked about it with Rihanna Manuel, who we had previously. Like this show, it resonated to us, so well, but it didn't seem as old as it was. Like, it's wild thinking about the show now. Like, this is a 30-year-old show, and like in my mind, I keep thinking this show like, oh, these are like, it was like mid '90s to like the late '90s, when it's like, no, the show ended in '95, but like syndication is what kept it relevant and like. And ingrained in our system, and it's just like The Simpsons, right? Like I think of like the parallel with The Simpsons, where that show, like, and when I used to another show that we were both familiar with, Talking Simpsons. When I first started listening to that show, I was like, I have like a strong memory of all of these episodes, thinking that like, oh, I saw that when it was live, but like one, I couldn't have because I was overseas during like most of those, right? And then like. I have a fondness to episodes that are almost as old as this show, but it was because of that syndication. Like these shows being in syndication so much and seeing so much of it, like you just have a natural attachment to it.
Yeah, I guess it had to probably be the mid '90s when I was first watching this, because I think back then they were really hard and fast about the whole like 100 episodes gets you into syndication.
Right.
So yeah, this episode is like, I mean, there's a joke right at the beginning that makes this a 1991 episode. But the show never really feels like early 90s. I mean, compared to the show that I was watching right before it, Saved by the Bell, which is so distinctly early 90s. Like, this is like,
right.
Well, there's certain elements where it's like, okay, that was the style or something that people said a lot in the early 90s. But, like, honestly, this show was not that outdated in the late 90s. Nowadays, it is a bit outdated. But,
right.
I mean, so like some of the comedy in this show, like, I'm still laughing at it 30 years later. And a lot of those other shows I was watching, those same, afternoons after school, I don't even think I laughed at them in the 90s. I was just like, well, it's on, so, I'll see what Zach's up to this week, or I'll see what Stephanie Tender's doing this week, but I'm probably not going to laugh. I really enjoyed this episode a lot, rewatching it, even though, I saw, like I said, I saw the list, and I was like, ooh, pool episode. First of all, I mistook it as thinking it was one where Geoffrey was the pool hustler. He wasn't. I also thought like, oh, this will be an episode where it's Will and Carlton going to the pool hall together. No. So the one thing I didn't like about this episode was that it was very, the siblings were barely in it. Viv was barely in it, but it still had some really good moments and really good characters outside of the normal, Fresh Prince averse.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, like I said, I think it's one I don't remember as fondly growing up, but having watched it, something I really enjoyed. I think we'll go right into it. So the episode that we are watching, this is episode 22, Bank Shot, which first aired in February 25th, 1991. This episode was directed by Jeff Melman, who we talked about before. Is a legendary sitcom director, directed stuff from Community. He's just like, when you look at his IMDb, it's just like, it's wild. I said this previously, I didn't realize, like, in watching this show, like, you watch a lot of credits, and when we first started, like, planning out the show, I started watching Community again, and one of my favorite episodes was the theory of quantum physics. That episode with, like, the split timeline, and that was,
oh my gosh,
that was also directed by Jeff Melman.
Wow.
So it's like, it's very great when you see someone so prolific, and this show is Jeff Melman's baby. And it was also written by Bennie R. Richmond Jr. Bennie also wrote for the sitcom Martin, as well as the Jamie Foxx show. And in this episode, we only have 3 rules: no fighting, no spitting, and use coasters.
Yeah, Sonya sent over a note before we recorded about, like, was it a pool or something that she went to? Like, not a pool hall, but a pool, where the giant no spitting sign, the spit coming from the person in the no spitting sign is way too big to be normal spit. Like, that guy needs medical attention.
Right.
I do remember, obviously that the pool hall has those rules, but when I was a kid, I used to go to a community pool, and they had a sign that said, no defecating, no urinating, and no expectorating. And for the longest time, I had no idea what expectorating is.
Wait,
spitting.
What is expectorating?
Expectorating is spitting. But it's like, okay, look, I will definitely not pee or poo in this pool. Look, like, just for the common good. But, like, if I'm in the pool and I want to, like, spit some chlorinated water at my brother, like,
right.
I don't know if you can stop me from doing that.
I mean, I think it's like, well, is there a difference between, we're going to get to gross?
Yeah. There's a difference between, like, spitting pool water at your brother or,
like, hawking a loogie.
Hawking water. Yeah. Big difference, I guess.
I mean, now in the COVID times, no, there's not.
Yeah.
Like, like, now it's like, don't ever do any of that. But yeah, no, I think those are not bad rules to live by. Like, you wouldn't want someone to spit in your house.
And especially at a pool hall.
Yes.
Though, I do believe that when you put that rule in a bar, you're kind of low-key asking to have spit in the bar, because why even bring it up in the first place? I guess,
right. All right.
There's probably chew or something involved.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, like, so it's really weird because, like, I live in Florida, and there are some bars where you can just smoke in the bars, and then there's some that you can't. But I just, like, I don't know, like, I think you're right. I think you're asking for stuff to happen, but, like, also maybe that's why you have bouncers,
Yeah. Actually, bringing up, like, pool halls in Florida, I've been to Orlando a bunch of times, and every time that I'm, like, in an Uber or a Lyft or whatever from the airport, I pass by this one pool hall a lot, and it's called Clicks. But it's all in caps on the, like, it's not the actual overhang for the business, but, like, when you go to, like, a strip mall, there's that giant list of stores.
Right.
So there's one that says Clicks, but it's all in caps, so it looks like the word cucks.
Oh.
And I every time we pass by it, I mean to take a picture, but I don't want to, like, tell the driver to be like, hey, can you stop? I want to take a picture of this thing that might be viral. So if you're in Orlando and you pass by Clicks, take a look at that sign, and maybe you can post it online.
That's something that, being a Floridian, I might have to do that for the clout. I'll make sure I credit you. I just, like, this credit, credit Dave Rutten.
Or credit the owner of Clicks.
Absolutely.
Because I think they knew what they were doing.
So, in this episode, we start out this episode with a little bit of, like, Will kind of teasing Uncle Phil, because Aunt Viv is getting ready to leave to go to Berkeley to speak. Again, I like that in this episode, because we're going to get soon where they don't, like, actually, like, talk about the schools. Like, we were talking about, like, two big, like, we've in this episode and in previous episodes, we were talking about like two big like California universities. Like we talked to UC Berkeley, and then like previously they talked about UCLA. Like I think that's very important. Like because it kind of shows like this is like topic of like it is like this is California. But I also think it does a lot to establish that Aunt Viv is a very important professor for someone who works in UCLA, I assume, right? And if it doesn't work at UCLA, works in another college, but is like such a powerful orator that she's also like guest speaking at UC Berkeley. Like I think that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, Uncle Phil is definitely not worthy of her, as Will states.
Right.
Before the credits even start, I took note that he makes fun of his uncle for being fat, bald, and also, that he's happy that Aunt Viv is leaving him. So, I'd like, know what? Like, I'm kind of, at the end of the episode, I'm like, why is Phil bailing him out? Like, he really ranked on him very early, and, I think it's coming from a place of love, but, like, sometimes it's a little bit too much. Yeah. Like, it reminds me of, like, some early episodes, or actually, no, all episodes of Saved by the Bell, where, like, they make fun of Screech when he's when he's with them.
Yeah.
And, like, it gets to a point where it's like, that's just straight up rude. There's no, like, joke to it. You're just calling him, like, a huge geek. Like,
just to be a jerk.
Or is he just your whipping boy?
Yeah, you're just doing it like, I'm just going to be a huge jerk to Screech. And it's like, yo, what are you doing? So, like, it's just like, it's also like when I see stuff like people are like, oh, well, Screech would have been blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, do you, like, know the people he hung out with? Like, Zach Morris was an asshole to him. Like, that's his best friend. And he was just, like, doing that just to do that. I think this is more of just, like, when you're 17, you think everything you say is hilarious, and you're always afraid of it. Like, I remember, like, pulling a prank on my uncle when I moved in with him. Like, I would always, like, make his coffee, and I was like, I'm going to put too much sugar because that's hilarious. And then, like, he had to pull me aside. He's like, hey, dude, I have diabetes. Like, you can't do that. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what any of this means, and I didn't know that. So, like, I mean, kids are just dumb. Like, I think that's the kind of big takeaway of it. Is just, like, kids are not smart at all. Yeah. But yeah, so as we come in, like as they go through, Hilary is talking to Aunt Viv, and she's trying to like explain like she can be more adult and take over the house, so like having Geoffrey take over. And Sonya has in her notes, she says, as a 34-year-old woman, she feels Hilary reading 17 in her 20s. She says she adores reading Teen Vogue right now, as they tend to have fashion and makeup choices I like better. And like they're also like strangely poignantly like topical news items. Like,
oh yeah, no, they have great reporting.
Right, and it's
Teen Vogue has great reporting.
Right, and it's like it's weird. So for people who don't know, like both Dave and I used to be in press, right? I think you were definitely way more in like real press than I was. But like I do remember, like I think it's also like it's weird to codify a lot of that press that maybe the target audience is for younger people, because there are people who are our age or older. In some instances that work in those, in those areas that do try to make it not just like, oh, you can be a kid reading it. It's like, hey, I'm writing, like, I never wrote an article like about something knowing like my target audience are 15 to 16-year-olds, which like probably people who are going to read it, but I would want to be like, I want to write something that I know that if I was to see this, I would want to read it and enjoy it. Like I might have to broaden it out a little bit, but I want to make sure that it's easy to be digestible by everyone, right?
Yeah.
I
have to say, like I if I turned my Zoom camera at 90 degrees, you'd see the covers of I used to work at GamePro magazine. I used to work at Official Xbox magazine. So I did appreciate that in this episode, she's reading real magazines.
Right.
Like around this time, I think actually maybe a year or 2 or 3 after this is when you'd see like, oh, well, we don't want to pay this company or we don't want to give free publicity to this company. So let's just do a generic magazine. But yeah, in this episode, Hilary's always reading a real magazine. 17, I think Home and Gardening was the middle phase, and then like Parenting magazine was the last phase.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, especially back then, print was big, so I was glad to see it in this episode.
Yeah. So Aunt Viv, also is like, Will's trying to get the car from Aunt Viv, and she tells Will that he can't use it until until 1993. So
it was like end October 1992, which
right.
I looked up the episode and you only gave yourself a year of runway. So there's so many other shows making jokes like this similar joke, and they would set it 5 or 6 years later, which I think that maybe they just weren't thinking about syndication in 1991 when this episode came out, because of course it works literally right when the episode comes out, but this episode being in syndication, you'd be like, that was 3 years ago.
Well, I wonder if
I don't.
If she was just setting up when you graduate high school, because when they do the graduation, they literally put the graduation year on that. So I wonder if it's just no, we're just we are going to put in media res when this is dated.
But nothing else really literally gives the 1991 date to this episode.
Right.
So, I mean, not to play Monday morning, writer for this episode, but yeah, they could have just said oh, and Will, you can't drive the car until your senior year of college or something.
Right. That would have been fine. So that is when Will tries to get the car from Uncle Phil. So he can go to a pool hall, in downtown L.A. Now this is where Sonya has her notes that she only knows about downtown L.A. from an intro of the YouTube video where the streets have no names. I guess you don't go there. I've never been. Well, no, I've been to downtown LA. I've been to a couple of karaoke spots. I love downtown LA. It wasn't really awful for me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when you did E3 stuff. If you.
Yeah, I've only been to E3. I mean, I've been to E3 a bunch, so I don't know how close to downtown LA it is. But I've been to mostly not great hotels, so I'm guessing those may have been closer, but I honestly don't know. The only thing that I distinctly remember is the area surrounding E3 and a couple times being on a bus to or from E3 and being oh, there's that one level from Tony Hawk. That's literally the extent of my LA knowledge.
Yeah, I've never. So, and that's the really crazy thing. I've never done the E3 junket. When I went to LA, it was to shoot a movie, and then that was really it, right? So, and then we got done. I think Aziz and I, we shot that movie with our crew. We did it in 2 days. So I had 5 days of LA. So it's always so weird to me because again, the circles we travel in, a lot of our mutual friends, I hear people, oh, I hate LA and I hate Staples and all this other stuff. The only worst that we had is we were going to go get food. It was me, Aziz, and buddy Joe Garcia. We went to go get food, and we were taking the bus around LA because you don't there's no need to drive.
Nobody walks in LA. There's that song.
Yeah. So we're taking the bus, and we couldn't get off of the bus because they were doing police drills down the street.
Whoa.
So we were just what the heck? So at one point we just see Joe, we circled Joe 3 times. We told the bus driver hey, can you just stop right here? We'll just get out. But that's the extent of awful LA. So I don't know, maybe when all this pandemic stuff stops and then I go to E3, I can start hating E3 LA as much as everybody else does.
Yeah. Hit all the Fresh Prince spots.
Yes.
Was this show actually? Did they ever do remote recording in LA that you would recognize things outdoors?
I don't think so because I think a lot of stuff is sets, right?
The
closest thing would have been ULA. ULA, but that's also just a set. So that's the thing. And I believe the show was shot in Burbank. I'm not 100% sure. And I could definitely look it up at some other point, but I do believe the show was shot in Burbank. So
I mean, this is all sets too. This whole episode, they didn't hit up a famous L.A. pool hall.
Yeah. But if you do go to certain places in L.A., they will let you know that you will get videotaped. And I went to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles, and when you go in there, there's a huge sign saying, "Hey, if you eat here, you are subjected to be on film." Which I thought, again, I'm a kid from Jacksonville, Florida. I'm this is the big times. What is this? What?
Guy Fieri just has a residence there.
I wish.
I do remember the very first time I visited LA. It was for E3, and I was taking a bus from the airport to whatever hotel we were staying at. And I do remember seeing within 5 minutes, we're stopped at a stoplight, and I see 2 guys just meeting on a street corner and shaking hands, and I'm like, wait, those are two guys from the real world. It was from the real world, New York.
Oh,
I forget who it was, but I was like, wow, I guess you're always just meeting reality stars here, which is only partially true.
Right.
There've been plenty of times I've been in LA where I haven't met anyone famous.
Yeah.
But that time I was like, oh, I guess this is just what it's like here. Like you see someone semi-famous every few minutes.
I guess I don't. Well, I was gonna say I don't think I met anybody famous when I went to LA. But like one of the actors in my short literally just got nominated for an award.
Oh my God.
So I guess I kind of like congratulations, Jordan, who was he's tremendous in the short. But yeah, he just got nominated for this he did this I guess a love short and got nominated for an award. So that's someone kind of famous I know. So that was weird to me. But anyway, so we get back to the show. Uncle Phil is very staunchly against giving Will the car, which again I agree. And his whole thing is he doesn't want him to go to the pool hall, which that allows Will to do the shoulder, the devil shoulder gimmick, right? Where he has the devil on his shoulder, and I thought it was very funny that the devil on the shoulder is this super kind of Will's version of ghetto. Character hey, what you do? You got to go down. He never said you couldn't go to the pool hall. But instead of having an angel, he has two devils kind of on the side.
I do think Phil would be proud of Will that he lawyered himself into being able to go.
Right.
They found that legal loophole and he worked it. But I also liked that apparently though usually when you have an angel and a devil, or in this case two devils on a shoulder, it's just someone's imagination. But Will literally physically was attacked by his shoulder devil. So I like that working on a different level of shoulder devil here.
Right. No, it's definitely like you said, it's not even tangible, right? Because he's just it's almost like a JoJo stand. For people out there who gets that reference, it's I think it's wild.
If someone came into the room, he wouldn't be able to explain it. They would literally just hum away oh, you have a devil and it attacked you and that's why you did that. You have to leave.
Now, have you ever had anything like this where you've kind of construed what your parents they said, oh hey, you can't do this, but in a way where you could kind of loophole it out?
Man, I don't know if I ever did. That was a good little boy.
That's the thing. It's
actually boring boy.
Well, yes, that's the thing. I think both when we had Sarah, we did an episode that got lost. Where we talked about kind of sneaking out, and they were all "Hey, do you all have stories about sneaking out?" No, no, I don't. I don't know. There have been times where I have done the thing that we'll talk about at the end of the episode where hey, you did something stupid. Do you have a reason? No, I don't. But I've never had something my parents hey, don't do that. Where I just in my mind have twisted it and been no, I should still do that. I've never had that. I've never had that kind of idea.
Yeah, and I mean the whole subject of pool surrounding this episode, I have to confess, I was once a nationally ranked. No, I'm kidding. I rarely ever played pool in my life. Every time it's been an embarrassing situation, and the few times that I've went in the last few years, I've just literally in this episode where I saw the arcade games in the back and just kind of lost focus for a second and looked at them and been oh cool, Arkanoid. That's usually my pool hall experience nowadays, is just what else do you have besides pool?
Right.
Okay, I have one of those.
That's my bowling experience. I am a very terrible bowler. And I just I'll look around hey, what kind of arcades you guys Is that this new that new Ninja Turtles cabinet? I like that. I'm gonna check that out. It's always not fun, and I'm also not good at pool.
Is that a reheated Elio's Pizza? I'll have one of those.
So we actually get to the pool hall. Excuse me, different building.
This episode is just meant to screw with
Absolutely.
you guys. Also, Bank Shot, and there was a basketball episode a few weeks back.
Right.
It's all confusing. It's very confusing.
The naming conventions on all this is wild. But so we get to the pool hall. Sonya makes a note that it's a lot cleaner than she thought it would be. I don't know. I've never been to like any like disgusting pool houses.
Yeah.
Or pool halls, excuse me.
Yeah.
But she said it is funny that you do see a homeless gentleman sleeping on one of the tables. She says, I'm surprised Will didn't kicked out of the pool hall for standing on the table when the older woman kicked the guy out for not using a coaster. There is rules for no coasters, not rules for not standing on the table though.
Yeah, there's no rules for not sleeping on the table either.
Exactly.
And like obviously, I think, and we'll talk more about him later because he's magical and one of my favorite parts of the episode. Fred Lomax Jr. Like his sleeping is like it's on the books. It's okay. He's cleared it with the manager, so there's no problem, and it doesn't seem to affect the table either because Will has a great time using that particular table. So yeah, like. Yeah, as long as what are the rules again? No spitting, no
spitting,
fighting?
no fighting, and no use coasters.
Okay, yeah, those are all reasonable.
Yeah, it's all reasonable. Like you said,
if anything, he should have a giant coaster that he sleeps on. Just so it's like anything that's on the table should be on a coaster, even people.
Yeah, I feel like if you don't have rules where you can't sleep on there, we're in Air Bud rules now. Like in Air Bud, there's no rules saying a dog can't play basketball. There's no rules saying you can't sleep on a pool table. Yeah. So Will ends up getting hustled by a mean-looking gangster dude who ends up winning Uncle Phil's car. But it's like a two-step level. Again, like not to like just continuously use wrestling terminology. Like he had to deal with like the manager first, right? Yeah. And who was like, "Oh, I'm really terrible at pool." Then gets hustled by the dude. And I do want to bring up the manager part just because. We did record this episode previously, and Sonya had shared with us that she had taken a photo with a one Mr. Ted DiBiase, which I'm extremely jealous about. It's a really great photo. But yeah, like I think it's always very weird. I'm a guy who loves managers in wrestling, right? Yeah. So I like this guy. Like he's a scumbag, but like I was like, oh, this guy's like a little. Like JJ Dillon or Jim Cornette, like I love like having this guy like kind of being like your heater before you go and fight like the actual real
like very very Bobby Heenan-esque.
Yes,
I would say
definitely.
Which is like when I watch this episode, I'm like, well, I'm obviously never going to be the hustler, or maybe not even good enough to be the hustled, but I can be the guy who sets up the hustler, who like is so bad that like I give the guy who's about to be hustled the confidence to bet again.
Right.
I can do that. That's my job. If I ever need to get a side gig at a pool hall, I will be the hustler's manager, and I know I'll get at least 10% for it.
Yes. That guy's hair, the hustler's hair, man.
Really
I don't think we talked about it. That is like some. So again, not to bring up like all these wrestlers. Xavier Woods, who has like tremendous hair, and I really want Xavier. If you ever listen to this, please come on the show. Love to have you on. But it's that kind of thing where like he kind of like lays his hair back. It is that kind of like really good perm job where it's just like, man, like I wish my hair wouldn't have been gone for like the last 15 years. I would have loved to have done something like that. That was just like, I don't know. It's just, everything about that dude was like glorious and slick. And I was just like, man, I wish I had all of that.
I did love with the initial hustling, the montage, and there's another montage later with Phil, but I think Will had the better montage shots of him doing various weird poses as he's shooting. I forget what the song is. Is it I Got the Power for him?
I Got the Power by Snap is the song that he uses for Will, yeah.
Yeah. So like he has the one where he's doing it through the legs. But what I really liked, and they even put it in the credits too, which is like it's a great shot in an episode of a 90s sitcom. If they put it again in the credits, so there's the one where he's like literally looking back at the camera and smiling,
right,
and shooting. Excuse me, and like. That was a precursor to one of my favorite Fresh Prince jokes, which I think is probably 2 or 3 seasons away. It's it might be a 2-part episode where he goes back to Philly, and he goes back to the basketball courts, and he sees the guy again. And I think Carlton or Jazz asks him like, who is that guy? And he's like, oh, that's the guy who's spinning me around in the credits. And I'm like, wait, you can do that on TV? You can acknowledge that you're a TV show? That's amazing. I love this.
Yeah. No, it's really that episode. I can't wait till we probably will have you back on that episode. Like I can't wait to talk about that episode because it's just so great and
I've been to Philly once, so I'm not really an expert, but I'm almost barely sort of.
I have also been to Philly once, but I was like 5 last time I went to Philadelphia. Really should go again. Should go see my grandma. Grandma Pat. One day I will go and visit you back again in Philly. But yeah, so Will ends up getting hustled. 300. He ends up needing $300. He only had $200 on him, which honestly, that's a lot of. Like, I get they're rich, but to me, that would have been a lot of money as a sophomore or junior in high school. And he is set. They ended up taking the car keys for the Mercedes Benz, which at some point, if I was Will, I would have been like, that math doesn't add up.
No, not at all. You don't. Yeah, you don't give a multi-$1,000 car for a $300 bill,
right?
Or debt. The not so moral way this episode could have ended is Will going into the house and like looking for something that he knows they probably have storage in that house where it's like, oh, let me go in the storage room,
right,
and get this like one painting that they haven't bothered to put up on the wall. It's probably worth multiple hundreds or even thousands of dollars, and bring that out and give them to him, and then look, you're settled, and then some,
right.
But then that wouldn't be a sitcom. That would be a terrible way to solve a problem.
It's like, oh, hey, we're going to just fleece all this material. Like, it's just, like I said, it is just very weird. But, I mean, like I said, it's a sitcom. So he comes home. He first tries to ask Hilary, who had just told Ashley, like, who's inquiring, like, who Ashley is going out with to his birthday party. Like, it's very weird because it almost feels very throwaway. Like, there's so much in this A plot, like the B plot, like, really does feel just like it was like throwaway lines. Like, you were just trying to pad out the lines. And what it should have done is gave it a little bit more free time to my man Fred. So Fred the hobo ends up coming with Will to the house. And while Will and Hilary go to look for money, Fred lays on the couch and then he mistakes Uncle Phil for Geoffrey.
Yep.
And he's like,
this is where he gets S rank, by the way. Like, his original scene on like sleeping on the pool table is good,
right?
And then this, I'm like, this is where Fred Lomax Jr. becomes Fred Lomax Jr. just like a bam, like one after another, just amazing jokes with Phil and just the waking up to cocktails. I love that.
Yeah. No, it's just like, and he wanted Roy Royce, which I think Sonya had looked it up as
Rob Royce.
Rob Royce, there you go. She said looked it up as like kind of like an old fashioned, which is like, I don't know, like maybe I'm just like really bad at drinking alcohol. Like I just started drinking like real cocktails like a grown adult. Like I'm just used to like, oh, what beer do you have? Like I'll just take like a dark, like I'll have like I almost said Jaeger. That's not a beer. A Guinness. I'll have a Guinness or like a flat tire or something like that. But like when people
no, I'm still the guy who goes to like, oh, we're gonna go to this really great cocktail bar. I'll be like, great. What are the beers there? Because I can rarely take a cocktail.
Right.
Like it has to be like the first thing I drink in a night, and then maybe nothing else after that. Because otherwise, I'm just like, I'm out like a light. But like if I'm Fred Lomax, I'm gonna have that Rob Roy, and I'm just gonna go right back to sleep on that couch.
Well, so the first time like I actually did like a really big drinking thing like outside of here is I think when I first met you, which was PAX 2012, right? It was literally at the Gays Radar party. And I always, my go-to if I go out is just a rum and Coke, because a rum and Coke is like, it's not bad, and they usually put enough Coke where they dilute the rum, so it's like you could drink that all night and you're fine. But this was my first press event, so I didn't know, like, so I'm just like in my mind, like, okay, I'm gonna do the rum and Coke, and I get my money out, so I can pay cash. I don't like using it. I don't like using my card, leaving a tab. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll just pay for rum and Coke. And then like it was, the lady was like, oh no, this is all it's comped. Like you just paid tip, and I was like, excuse me, what? And then I got really drunk that night. So yeah, I could definitely understand not being able to hold alcohol because that was definitely an experience.
By the way, the character who played Fred Lomax Jr. I forget the actor's name, but he went on to be the security guard in The Office.
Right.
And was in I think 15 to 20 episodes, and that's another like top tier thing about this guy is that he can play Fred Lomax Jr., who is just out there, and he's just Fred Lomax Jr.
Right.
That's really the long and the short of it. But he's also the security guard on The Office, who is very low key. He almost doesn't stand out that much in The Office.
Until he does.
I'm blanking on episodes like that featured him prominently, but once you see him, that's the security guard. But
I would say the fire drill episode.
Right.
I know that. There's a lot of times because him and Dwight always go at it, and like you said, when you told me that, I was just like, wait, what? Because he is a character he's not Stanley or one of these characters that know, but when you see him, you're just like, oh, this guy always has a commanding presence when he's on an episode.
Yeah. Totally.
But yeah, so Uncle Phil is very upset, but he ends up going with Will and also with Geoffrey, who turns out was the sparring butler for Chuck Norris. Which
I know you mentioned this a little bit in the basketball episode that Matt Allen was on, I believe. But I'm still at this point, I'm not 100% sure if when Geoffrey talks about these old occupations, whether he's BSing or he's actually telling the truth. Because in my mind's mind, like I said before, I thought he was the hustler in this episode or the anti-hustler.
Right.
But wait, so are you a badass or not? Because he said he was good at pool in that basketball episode, but then why isn't he playing pool in this episode?
What was it, pool or snooker? I think they're different, right?
But I think they're similar enough that you'd be good at one if you were good at the other. I don't know. Again, like I established earlier, I know next to nothing about pool,
right?
But I assume that I guess he's probably played, especially since later on he has the pool cue. I'm assuming that he's played pool multiple times with Phil, and they've established Geoffrey, you're really good, but Phil is the top rank in this household of pool.
Right.
Of course, actually, thinking who else in the house before Will arrived, who was he playing pool with? It was probably just Geoffrey all the time. They probably have an established hierarchy of who's better at pool.
Well, I think they talked about Uncle Phil used to do this back in Baltimore, when he was first starting out, when he was going to school. So he probably he's probably lived a whole life. It's weird to think so Carlton, well, Hilary would be the oldest, so she's 20, in this show, and Uncle Phil's in his he's in his late 30s. At this time, so I don't know. Some of the math is off because, he would have had to have been Hilary would have had to have been not even born yet. Because I'm thinking with how Hilary lives, she's been pampered her whole life. So some of this math is kind of off a little bit. Either he's older or not, but you could see maybe before him and Aunt Viv got married, he was just a pool hustler, and then it's riding a bike. You never I've done I'm really good at fighting games, and there's been times where I've taken a break from a fighting game, and I might play a game or two to get back in, but then once you get back in, it's oh, okay, I know exactly what I need to do.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the wiki for Fresh Prince, which is not it's not the end all be all. That says he was 45 at the start of the show.
Okay.
Which I mean
that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Because if Hilary's 20, 21, right? He would have been. Yeah, so he would have been. Yeah, he would have been in his mid-20s. Yeah, so that makes to me that makes more sense, and that kind of works.
Yeah. And if he's in pool halls, he would probably be in his early 20s when he's actually allowed to go, and probably with friends. Which, by the way, I meant to bring up earlier. It's so weird that Will's idea of a good time is going to a pool hall alone,
Right.
and soliciting games from strangers, which I'm like, you have to. I don't know how established Carlton is as like his like go-to friend is at this point, but like at least Jazz like would go with him,
Right.
Maybe Carlton, but like Jazz for sure would go. I did find it weird that like neither of them accompanied him. I don't know if like they already like had like this episode is already packed to the gills. We can't really afford an extra line for every one of these scenes for Jazz or Carlton. But
I mean,
yeah, that was a little that seemed a little off to me. Just that he's doing all this by himself.
Right.
But I guess that also kind of like if there's no friend with him in these scenes, then there's there's not that extra level to every single scene in the pool hall or every single interaction with Uncle Phil. Like if it's just Will and Phil, then it's a lot less complicated, I guess.
Right, but I mean, I would say again, like not to harp on the B plot because it's fine, but like we could have just used that whole B plot to have Carlton or Jazz, have a couple of lines. Like it wouldn't have been funny to see Fred and Jazz interact or Fred and Carlton interact. Like that would have been hilarious. Like instead of just like doing like throwaway jokes with Hilary.
I mean, they could have had Jazz there, and he could have been thrown out of the pool house.
Right.
Like that kind of writes itself. Like he gets thrown out of every pool hall scene by that lady. Like they literally set it up right from the start. Like somehow he like falls afoul of every single one of those 3 rules every single time, and then he gets thrown out. That's Jazz's thing anyway. So like, why not just have him thrown out of other things? But I will say, like regarding the Hilary subplot, I know that you guys have discussed before how like that Carlton isn't really realized quite yet as the guy he will be in later seasons. Like he's weirdly suave in that scene earlier in the episode where he's like chatting with a girl in the house, and then Hilary has to break it up. Like, is that a thing? Like, I don't know if he'll be like that in a year or two's time.
No,
he's that close to getting it.
Right. No, this is very much like it's like a weird preppy Carlton that I've never really noticed until like doing the rewatch for the show. And I think I think the next episode after this one, which I think is 72 hours, I think that's the next one. I think that's the first time where you kind of see Carlton become Carlton, right? Yeah. And it's one of the things it's one of the things that I love about these last couple seasons. You could tell like they've had time to sit down and like, okay, how do we adjust these characters? Yeah. Because I do see that you kind of see more of a heart and more of a family. Like even in this one, kind of like to get to where we're at towards the ending with this one. Like Uncle Phil goes in and he ends up hustling the dude and he's doing it. The song that he has is Soul Man by Sam and Dave, which is great. And Sonya says like the suspenders and rolled up sleeves is like a chef kiss. I don't know, like as a bigger dude, suspenders is always like the way to go. I don't like being a bigger dude. Like suspenders just like they just work. I think this is where we got to the wrestling conversation last time because we were talking about IRS. Like it's just it's just a good work. It's a good look.
Like regarding the next episode, actually, the 72 hours, I do remember like watching this whole episode. I'm like, oh, I guess Carlton's like still somewhat cool, but then literally like HBO Max, it went into the next episode automatically, and the very first thing in that next episode is Carlton like in a barbershop quartet, and I forget what song he's singing, but it's hilarious, and I almost wanted to just keep watching. But at that point, my HBO Max trial was like just hours away from ending, so I'm like, better not risk it. Let me close out and then cancel. But yeah, like at that point, I'm like, oh, they are like they don't quite know who Carlton is just yet,
right? Yeah, and I mean, like I said, we will get. Like I said, we will talk about that literally next week.
Yeah.
But no, I think it was very. I think it was such a really good look. And but I do think like one of the things. So we get home, Aunt Viv comes. Well, one, Uncle Phil, not only does he hustle that dude, but he also gets like an additional $600, which I think we did the math. it was how much? It was what? 1,100 altogether.
Well, it's $100 a ball.
Right.
So he gets 900. There are 18 balls in pool, but I don't know if
you only
are allowed to hit all. You only do your side.
Right.
So I guess he won twice. But again, I'm no pool expert, so I don't know how you get $900 a head on this.
Right.
But I will point out that even though I found most of Will's montage shots, superior, I really did like the one where Phil is eating a sandwich, which I originally thought was a burrito, but then you guys corrected me, and it does seem more of a sandwich.
Yes.
And a sandwich seems like more of the thing that you could like slap together in a pool hall and sell for like $3 or something.
Right. No, it's just like that one shot, like you said, he's just eating it. It's just it's not even like he's shooting the pool. He's just like pushing the ball with the thing. I was like, is that really pool? Like, are you really doing pool?
Oh yeah, you'll notice like anytime that they're shooting, and it's one of those shots, it's like, oh, the balls rarely go in. It's when they do the close up on the hand and then the close up on the balls. It's like, oh, there's where you brought the ringer in and actually had good shots happen.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, I thought like the speech at the end, like Aunt Viv comes home and he's in Will's like, oh, you're not going to tell Aunt Viv. And he's like, no, like he's like, I'm not telling you. He's like, I'm not just doing this to be mean. And I think that's where like, and I talked about it with the episode with Rihanna. I think that's the thing that's very important about this show is that Uncle Phil is not here to be adversarial. Like, he's not here to be Will's bad guy. He's like, he is more in common with Will than anyone else in that family because they both were impoverished youths who like had this like wealth of potential. And Uncle Phil was like, someone saw the potential in me and helped me out, and I want to do the same for you. And that's where I think his frustration comes from. But I think that's a reading that I have, like, being, like, by the time this episode airs, being 34 years old, right? Like, me being 34, like, looking at it, like, yeah, I can totally see that, like, that idea of it. I'm not sure, like, if me, at 24, let alone, 17, which Will was, like, if I would had that same reading. But I do think it's a very important reading for it.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, I watched this show kind of out of order because it was in syndication, and I don't know if this is something that they, like, do they put, like, Phil's background on the back burner? Like, I remember watching, like, the original episode, like, the pilot, the first episode, and there's, like, he talks about, like, the, like, civil rights and meeting Malcolm X and all that. And I don't know if that's like a thing where like Family Matters, where it's like originally supposed to be family stuff, and then it just becomes a little bit wackier down the line.
Right.
Like I'm listening to the show, but like watching along, I'm just hoping. I'm like, I hope they kind of keep, Phil this same kind of like father figure, but also like something aspirational.
Yeah.
For Will too.
I think that's a thing that kind of gets. Like that does happen with this show. Like, so, like, spoilers for people who are watching along with us. Like, I have watched more in because like I've done the thing that Dave has set up. Like I'm going to watch HBO Max. I'm just going to keep this on because it's so good. But the great thing about it is it doesn't become like. Again,
he's never like he's never like what's his face on Family Matters.
Carl Winslow, right? It's like it doesn't become the Will. It doesn't become the Will and Phil show as like Carl Winslow and Steve Urkel. Like it becomes their show, like where it's like it's less Laura and Hardy and then more of like an actual family show, right? And like again, that's not throwing shade at Family Matters. I love Family Matters a lot.
Yeah.
But that show is more like the gimmicky. Like I said, it's more gimmicky Laura and Hardy slapstick stuff that you put through. This is a show like it's. To me, it's like almost to akin of like the Cosby Show, but it less has that stigma because Uncle Phil's not, Bill Cosby, and I also mean that like in how they frame this family, how they react to the kids and everything. Like it is a subversion of what Bill Cosby is, but like told in a different way. And I think that's very important, and I think that's something that James Avery brings in because when you watch those first couple episodes, it is set up to be adversarial. Like it is set up to be like a dynamic of like he's bad and I'm good. Like because like that's the thing that was frustrating when we first started doing the episodes was like having that whole Uncle Phil, like, well, he's not my kid, he's not my son, especially like, because we have seen these shows and syndications. Like, I know Uncle Phil treats Will just like one of his kids. And I think this is the first episode where you can see him treating him like one of his kids without being prodded or asked to. And I think that's very important.
Yeah. I mean, like, not to keep bringing the comparison to Saved by the Bell, but I literally did watch them back to back for years. But, like, Saved by the Bell never had that. Like, Zach was just a douche. And there was no one to be like, hey, Zach, look, I used to be like you, and here's how you should have handled X, Y, or Z. He was just able to be like the king of that world and use his time-stopping powers and be an a-hole.
Right.
But that's what like I've loved about like watching these early episodes is just that like, they come from that same place, and like, Uncle Phil is just an amazing father figure character.
No, it's just a really great episode. It's a really fun episode.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's a lot of personality, there's a lot of heart, and there's a lot of pull, which both Dave and I don't know much about. But Dave, what you do know a lot about, maybe the master of the segue, Saturday Night Live. And if you guys would like to hear Dave on another podcast, I would recommend any of the Laser Time episodes where Dave and my other buddy, Tony Wilson, hop on with Chris and they talk about Saturday Night Live. It's so great. Like again, like I said, I've known Dave for like 8 years now. But like I always love hearing Dave on podcasts because he's always a great resource. And like those Saturday Night Live ones are so great because before knowing Dave and knowing Tony, who I've known Tony a little bit longer because we used to work together, like you guys are the first two people I knew who were so like vocally like for Saturday Night Live. Like I remember like I would watch Saturday Night Live and I was just like, well, no one else watches this. And you'd go online and everybody's like, it's not cool to like Saturday Night Live. It's like, but I like Brian Fellows. Like, why isn't anyone else talking about this? And to have you guys do those shows, I thought was very cool and very important. And like, so any other podcasts that you would like to, promote on here?
I think as of the time of this recording, the most recent episode I was on for Laser Time was an episode about post credits production house stingers, which is a lot better than what I'm describing right now. But it's basically like the production house that's at the end of every episode, like Bad Robot, or I don't even know what the one for Fresh Prince is, to be honest. Like it's probably like NBC Entertainment or something.
Yeah.
But like even nowadays where Netflix or Hulu or HBO Max, as I like to call it, where they just like literally skip to the next episode, you still oftentimes get to see that little like 2-second production house thing at the end of an episode. And I literally suggested it to Chris. And then when it came time to compete against Diana in it, she just wiped the floor with me.
Well, that's a ringer.
I mean, it's literally like playing Uncle Phil in pool. Like Diana with TV credits, she's gonna just murder you, and that's what happens in that episode. But it's still a lot of fun. But that episode of Laser Time and Travis, I've like enjoyed hearing you recently on a bunch of VGAs. Always enjoy those, especially since I think about every month or so, I pitch an idea to to Michael. Just I'm like, hey, have you ever done top 5 blank? And he's like, I guess we haven't, and I think we might. So
the Cats one, I remember like they were just like we're gonna do Cats. I was like, huh, and they're like, oh yeah, from the thing, and I remember the PlayStation thing. I was like, oh yeah, that Cats thing is like, Dave had Cats. I was like, oh okay, I will go on. I'm effectively again bringing SNL. It's like I am now the I'm now the Alec Baldwin of Laser Time guests. Like I don't work for them, but I am on VGA a lot. I enjoy it though. I really do enjoy it. Those guys are great. Michael Ravarez, Chris Antista, Matt Allen. They do a really great job. The whole Laser Time network. If you can, please go and check them out. However, you can also give to our Patreon, which I would like you to do because that's money in my pocket. If you go to patreon.com/live from the pool house, you can support us At the $5 level, you will get an episode early. So if you're listening to this episode early, that is why. As well as we will have bonus episodes. I think by the time this airs, we will have either announced or we have done a commentary, or it's either a commentary or we're going to do like a special Patreon only episode about Gemini Man. And again, a Laser Time kind of connection. Sarah, who was on the previous episode, she reaches out to me. She's like, "Hey, you need to watch Gemini Man because it's very much like young Will Smith." And I was like, "Okay, only if you do this episode with us." So we will either have that announced or it will be up by the time you hear that episode. But you can follow. You can follow Sonya on Twitter at honey_child. Dave, they can follow you on Twitter at
Dave Rutten, just all one word, DaveRudden. And like I love chatting with you, and I love chatting beforehand with Sonya about this. But I love chatting with people after I've done podcasts about the episode.
Yes.
So like, yeah, just hit me up on Twitter if you remember this episode and have any cool memories of it, because I'd love to hear it.
No, absolutely. Let's keep that engagement going. You can follow me on Twitter at Travis L. Foster. Yeah, we do want to thank you guys so much for listening to Live from the Pool House. So for Dave and for Sonya, who is out gallivanting with Cole Cabana, I am TL Foster. This has been Live from the Pool House. Don't get thrown out like jazz. And there we go.
Yay.